The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 1 through 5. Chapter 1. The following are the speeches which Moses addressed to all the children of Israel before the passage over the Jordan, in the desert, extending from Suph, between Paran, and Thophel, and Laban, and Katzroth, and Yab. It was during the 40th year, in the 11th month, upon the first of the month, Moses related to the children of Israel all that the Ever-Living had commanded him for them, after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who lived at Ashtaroth in Edrei, on this side of the ford of the Jordan, in the land of Moab. Moses began to publish the law, and said,
Our ever-living God spoke to us in Horeb, saying, You have remained long enough on this mountain. Turn and march, and proceed with all your camps to the highlands of the Amorites, and all their neighbors in the dry lands of the hills, and thence to the plains and desert along the shore of the sea of the land of Canaan, and from Lebanon, as far as the great river Freight. Attend! I have opened the country to you. Go and seize the land which the Ever-Living promised to give to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and give it to them and to their posterity after them. But I told you all at that time, I myself could not support you alone. And now your ever-living God has increased you, and see, you are today like the stars of the sky in number. And the ever-living, the God of your fathers, will add to you beyond this 1,000 times, and will bless you as he promised. How can I alone bear your troubling, and carry your contentions? Go, choose for yourselves skillful, clear-sighted, and educated men to control you, and I will appoint them your chiefs. When you answered me, What you have said is good. What you have said, do it. I therefore chose as the chiefs of your tribes skillful and educated men, and gave them to you as your chiefs, colonels of regiments, and captains of companies, and captains of 50s, and captains of 10s, with magistrates for your tribes. I also ordered your judges at that time, saying, Listen between your brothers, and decide just judgments between a man and his brother, and the foreigners among you. Do not regard social station in deciding whether low or high. Listen not in fear of the station of a man, for justice belongs to God himself. But any matter that is too difficult for you, bring to me, and I will hear it. I instructed you also at that time as to what things you ought to do. Then we marched from Horeb and proceeded through all that great and terrible desert which you saw on the way to the hills of the Amorites, when our ever-living God commanded us to advance to Kadesh Barnea, where I said, You are now arrived at the hills of the Amorites, which our ever-living God has given us. Look, your ever-living God has provided the country before you to possess. Go up, seize it as the ever-living God of your fathers commands you. Fear not, nor be terrified. But all of you approached me, asking to send men before you to examine the country, and to report to you about the road by which you could go up to it, and about the cities that you were to go to. And the request seemed good in my opinion, and I appointed 12 princes, one from each tribe, and they turned and went up to the hills, and descended to the vale of Eshcol, and slandered it. But they took into their hands some of the produce of the country, and came back to us, and reported the matter, saying, It is a beautiful country that our ever-living God has given us. But you were not willing to go up, and rebelled against the order of your ever-living God, and murmured in your tents, and exclaimed, Because the ever-living hated us, he brought us out of the land of the Mitzrayim, and would give us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Alas for our advance! Our brothers have depressed our hearts by saying they are a people finer and taller than us. Their cities are large and fortified up to the skies, and we also saw the sons of Anak there. But I replied to you, Be not terrified, nor fear them. Your ever-living God who goes before you, he will fight for you in the way he did in your sight among the Mitzrayim, and in the desert where you saw how the ever-living carried you as a woman carries her child, along all the way that you went until he brought you to this spot. But on that occasion you were not relying upon your ever-living God, who marched before you in the journey to choose your encampments as a fire at night, to show the way you should go, and as a cloud by day. And the ever-living heard the sound of your words and was angry and swore, saying, This vile generation shall never see the beautiful land which I promised to give to their fathers. Only Caleb the son of Jephunneh shall see it. And I will give to him and his sons the country which he traveled through, for he went up confidently, following the ever-living. The ever-living was also angry with me on account of you, and said, You shall not go there. Joshua the son of Nun, your lieutenant, shall go. Encourage him, for he shall put Israel into possession. But your infants whom you said would be captured, and your sons who today know neither good nor evil, they shall go there, and I will give it to them, and they shall possess it. But you, turn back and march to the desert, towards the sea of Suph. Then you were grieved and replied, We have sinned against the ever-living. We will now go up and conquer according to all that the ever-living God commanded. And each one of you put on arms and went up to the hill. But the ever-living said to me, Order them, go not up and fight not, for I am not with you. Therefore you will fly before your enemies. So I spoke to you, but you would not hear, and you rebelled against the order of the ever-living, and were insolent, and went up to the hill. And the Amorites who occupied the hill advanced against you, and drove you like bees would do, and routed you like a tempest to the valley. So you returned and wept before the ever-living. But the ever-living would not hear your voice, nor listened. Consequently, you were detained at Kadesh for many days. You remained there a long time.
Chapter 2.
Until you turned back and marched to the desert towards the sea of Suph, as the ever-living commanded me, and wandered about the hills of Seir a long time. At last the ever-living said to me, You have wandered about this hill enough. Turn to the north, and command the people, saying to them, Pass over the borders of your brothers, the sons of Esau, who dwell in Seir. But they will be afraid of you, so carefully guard yourselves, and injure them not, for I will not give you a foot's space of their country, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You must buy food from them with money and eat it, and also purchase water from them for money and drink it. For your ever-living God has blessed you in every work of your hand, whilst you traveled this great desert these 40 years. Your ever-living God has been with you, and you have wanted for nothing. You consequently passed by your brothers, the sons of Esau, who occupy Seir, by the road of the Arabah, to Aaloth, and at Zion-Gaber, where you turned off and traversed the road of the desert of Moab. There the ever-living said to me, Do not trouble Moab, but keep yourselves from fighting. Turn, for I have not granted you this country, because I have given Ar to the sons of Lot as a possession. Then you arose and passed the vale of Yared, and at the passage of the vale of Yared, including the period of the march from Kadesh Barnea until the time you crossed the vale of Yared, was 38 years, until all the generation of fighting men belonging to the camp were dead, as the ever-living threatened them. For the hand of the ever-living was against them, to destroy them out of the camp until they perished. And when all the fighting men had died from among the people, then the ever-living spoke to me and said, Now cross over today the boundaries of Moab at Ar. But when you approach the sons of Ammon, neither distress nor hurt them, for I will not give the country of the sons of Ammon to you to possess, for I have given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. Rise, march, and cross the river Arnon. See, I have given you Sihon, king of Heshbon, the Amorite, and his country to break, assail, and defeat it in war. I have broken him this day, putting the dread and fear of you upon the face of the nations under every sky, who may hear the reports about you. They tremble and faint before you. Then I sent ambassadors from the desert of the east to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with proposals of peace, and said, I wish to pass across your country by the king's highway. I will not march many days, or deviate. You shall sell food for money, and I will eat it, and pay money for the water you give, and I drink it. I only wish to pass over on my feet. Do to me as the sons of Esau did who dwell in Seir, and the Moabites who inhabit Ar, until I have crossed the Jordan to the land which our ever-living God has given us. But Sihon, king of Heshbon, was not willing you should cross over him, for your ever-living God had stupefied his mind, and emboldened his heart, that by it he might give him into your hand, as he has now done. The ever-living God also said, See, I have begun to give up Sihon and his country before you. Seize it, take his land for a possession. Then Sihon advanced to meet us, he and all his force to fight at Jahaz. But our ever-living God delivered him to us, and struck him and his son and all his forces. And at that time we captured all his towns, and devoted all his cities, nor allowed the men, women, or children to escape. Beside the cattle we seized for ourselves, and the plunder of the cities which we captured, from Aroer on the banks of the Arnon, and the towns in the valley, and as far as Gilad, there was not a city that was too strong for us. Our ever-living God delivered the whole to our approach. The whole extent of the country of the Ammonites, all along the vale of Jabbok, with the towns of the highlands, and all that our ever-living God commanded.
Chapter 3.
Then we turned and went up towards Bashan, and Og king of Bashan advanced to meet us with all his forces to fight at Adarai. Then the ever-living said to me, Fear him not, for I have given him into your power with all his forces and his country, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon. So our ever-living God also subjected to us Og king of Bashan and all his forces, until not a remnant remained to him. We also captured all his towns in the same campaign. There was not a city we did not take, from the 60 towns in the district of Argob to the capital of Og in Bashan, all which towns were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, beside a great many towns of the Perizzites. We devoted them as we did to Sihon king of Heshbon. We devoted every city, men, women, and children, and all the cattle and plunder of those towns we seized for ourselves. We thus took, in the same campaign, their country from the possession of the 2 kings of the Amorites, which are this side of the Jordan, extending from the vale of Arnon to the hill of Hermon. All the towns of the uplands, and all Gilad, and all Bashan, to Salcah and Adarai, towns of the dominions of Og in Bashan. These countries you conquered in that campaign, extending from Aroer, which is on the river Arnon, and the half of Mount Gilad was given to the Reubenites and Gadites. But the remainder of Gilad and all Bashan, with the dominions of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh, all the plain of Argob, and all Bashan, which is called the land of Rephaim. Yair the son of Manasseh took all the district of Argob as far as the borders of the Geshurites and the Maccathites, and he called them after his own name, Yair's towns, but I gave Gilad to Machir. To the Reubenites and Gadites I also gave a part of Gilad, to the middle of the vale of Arnon, the valley as a boundary as far as Jabbok, with its valley to the border of the Ammonites, and the plain of the Jordan as a boundary from Kinneroth as far as the sea of the plain, the Dead Sea, down to the hill foot of Pisgah from the east. But I commanded you at that time, saying, Your ever-living God has given you this country to possess, but you must march fully equipped in the front of your brothers, the children of Israel, with all your forces. However, the women and children and cattle, for I know you have many cattle, may remain in the cities which I have given you, until the ever-living has settled your brothers like yourselves, and they are also in possession of the country which their ever-living God will give to them beyond the Jordan. Then you may each return. I also commanded Joshua at that time, saying, Your eyes have seen all that your ever-living God has done to these 2 kings. The ever-living will do the same to all the kingdoms which are over there. Fear them not, for your ever-living God will fight for you. And at that time I implored the ever-living, saying, Almighty Lord, you have now begun to show to your servant your grandeur and your strong hand. What power in heaven or on earth can do as you have done with your might? Let me, I pray, go over and see this beautiful country that is beyond the Jordan, those beautiful hills and Lebanon. But the ever-living was angry with me because of you, and would not listen to me. And the ever-living said to me, Let this be enough for you. Continue not to speak to me again about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah, and carry your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and see it with your eyes, for you shall not pass over this river Jordan. Therefore command Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over before the people, and he shall conquer for them the country that you will survey. We were then staying in the valley near Beth Peor.
Chapter 4.
Consequently now, Israel, listen to the constitutions and decrees which I will teach you to practice, that you may live and go and possess the country which the ever-living God of your fathers will give you. You shall not add to the matter that I command you, nor shall you detract from it, but keep the commands of your ever-living God as I have commanded you. Your eyes saw what the ever-living did because of Baal Peor, how the ever-living destroyed every man who went after Baal Peor among you. But you who kept fast to your ever-living God are all of you alive today. Attend to me as I teach you the constitutions and decrees which the ever-living, my God, commands you to practice when you arrive in the country which you are going to possess, and guard them and practice them. For they will make you wise and intelligent in the eyes of the peoples who hear of all these constitutions, who will say, This is a wise and intelligent people, this great nation. For what nation is so great as to possess gods in its breast, as our ever-living God is to us in all we ask of him? And what nation is so great, possessing institutions and decrees like these laws that I put before you today? Only guard yourselves and guard your lives carefully from forgetting the events that your eyes have seen, and from turning your heart away all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and to your children's children. Upon the day when you stood before your ever-living God at Horeb, when the ever-living commanded me, Collect the people to me, and I will let them hear what they must learn, so that they may fear me all the time they live on the earth, and teach their children. So you approached and stood below the hill, whilst the hill burned with fire up to the heart of the skies, with darkness, cloud, and gloom. There the ever-living spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard a voice speaking to you, but no image appearing. A voice alone, and it informed you of the covenant which he commanded you to practice, the 10 Commandments, and wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. But to me the ever-living ordered at that time to teach you the constitutions and decrees which you were to practice in the land into which you would pass to possess it. Therefore you must guard your minds very carefully, for you did not see any shape on the day the ever-living spoke with you in Horeb from the midst of the fire, from wickedly making for yourselves a carved shape, any image or model of man or woman, or form of any beast that is upon the earth, form of any bird which flies in the sky, form of any reptile on the ground, form of any fish that is in the waters lower than the earth. Or if you raise your eyes heavenward, and see the sun, or the moon, or the stars, all the host of the skies, and bow to and worship them, and serve those which your ever-living God has apportioned to all the nations under all the skies. For the ever-living selected you, and brought you from the iron works of the Mizraim to be a people for himself, as you are today. But the ever-living was angry with me over your affairs, and swore to prevent me crossing the Jordan, and to prevent me arriving at the beautiful country which your ever-living God has given to you to possess. For I must die in this country. I may not pass over the Jordan, but you will pass over and possess that beautiful land. Guard yourselves from forgetting the covenant of your ever-living God, which he contracted with you, for fear you should make for yourselves a carved image, contrary to the command of your ever-living God. For your ever-living God is a consuming fire. He is a jealous God. When you have begotten children and children's children, and are in the country, and have corrupted yourselves, and make carved images, and do evil in the eyes of your ever-living God, provoking him, I call to witness today the heavens and the earth to witness to you, that perishing you shall perish quickly from off the land which you pass over the Jordan to possess. Your time shall not be prolonged in it. But you shall certainly waste away, and the ever-living will scatter you among the nations, and your remnant shall die as a number among the nations where the ever-living has driven you. And you shall there serve gods made by human hands, of wood and stone, who cannot see, or hear, or eat, or breathe. But if you should from there entreat your ever-living God, and decide to seek him with all your heart and with all your soul, strengthen yourselves and encourage yourselves with all these events, after long periods, and return to your ever-living God and listen to his voice. For your ever-living God is a merciful God. He will not desert you, and will not turn from you, and will not forget the covenant with your fathers which he swore to them. Therefore search now the former times that were before you, from the time when God constructed man upon the earth, and from one extreme of the heavens to the other extreme of the heavens. Has there ever been such a great event as this, or has there been heard its like? A people who heard the voice of God speaking from amid the fire as you heard it, and lived? Or that God attempted to go and take for himself one nation from the breast of another nation, with trials, and miracles, and portents, and war, and with a strong hand and a directing arm, and great manifestations, such as all those your ever-living God has made in your sight upon the Mitzrayim for you? Then see and learn that the ever-living is God, and except him none. From the heavens you have heard his voice, when he taught you, and upon earth you have seen his great fire, and heard his commands from the midst of the fire, because he loved your fathers, and chose their race after them, and brought you by his great might to his presence from among the Mitzrayim, and will drive great and more powerful nations than you before your face, to bring you to give you their country as a possession, as at this day. Therefore learn today and fix it in your heart, that the ever-living, he is God in heaven and upon the earth, and except him there is no other. So keep his institutions and his commandments which I commanded you today, that you may prosper, and your children after you, and then your days will be long upon the land which your ever-living God will give to you for all time.
Chapter 5. Moses again assembled all Israel, and said to them,
Listen, Israel, to the constitutions and decrees which I proclaim in your hearing today, both to learn them and preserve them by practicing. Our ever-living God contracted a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the ever-living contract that covenant, but with us ourselves, those in this place, all of us alive today. The ever-living spoke face to face with you at the hill from the midst of the fire. I stood between the ever-living and you at that time to report to you the dictation of the ever-living, for you were afraid at the presence of the fire, and could not ascend to him. And he said, 1. I am your ever-living God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods in my place. 2. You shall not make for yourselves an image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or what is on the earth beneath, or what is in the waters lower than the land. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, your ever-living God, am a jealous God, punishing the sins of the parents upon their children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. But I show mercy to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. 3. You shall not take the name of your ever-living God in vain, for the ever-living will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. 4. Regard the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the ever-living God commanded you. You may labor 6 days and do all your business, but the 7th day is a rest to your ever-living God. You shall not do any business upon it. You, or your son, or your daughter, or your servant, or your handmaid, or your ox, or your ass, or any of your cattle, or your hired man who may be in your house, because your workmen and your maidservant shall rest like yourself. Remember also that you were slaves in the land of the Mitzrayim, but your ever-living God brought you out from there with a strong hand and a directing arm. Therefore your ever-living God commanded you to make the day of rest. 5. Honor your father and your mother as your ever-living God commanded you, so that your days may be lengthened, and that you may prosper upon the land which your ever-living God gives to you. 6. You shall not murder. 7. You shall not fornicate. 8. You shall not steal. 9. You shall not bring up false evidence against your neighbor. 10. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not long for your neighbor's farm, or his slave, or his handmaid, his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. The ever-living dictated these commands to the whole assembly of you from the midst of the fire, of the cloud, and of the gloom, a great voice, and did not desist there, but wrote them upon 2 tables of stone, and gave them to me. But when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, and the mountain burning with fire, then all the chiefs of your tribes and your nobles approached to me, and said, Now we have seen our ever-living God, his majesty and his greatness, and have heard his voice from the midst of the fire today. We have seen that God can speak with mankind and lives. Therefore now, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we ourselves remain longer to hear the voice of our ever-living God, we shall die. For who is there of any race who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire, like us, and has lived? Go yourself near and listen to all that our ever-living God says, and then report to us all that our ever-living God dictates to you, and we will listen to it and do it. And the ever-living heard the voice of your speeches when you spoke to me, and the ever-living said to me, I have heard the voice of this people speaking to you. All they have said is beautiful. What would I give if there were such a heart in them to attend to me, and to keep all my commands for all time? Then there would be prosperity to them and to all their children forever. Go, tell them to return to their tents. But you stay here, and I will dictate to you all my commands, and the constitutions and decrees which you must teach them to practice in the country which I will give them to possess. Therefore you must practice them as your ever-living God commanded you. You shall not turn away to the right or the left. You shall walk in every way as your ever-living God commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and lengthen your days in the country which you shall possess.
The end of chapters 1 through 5 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 6 through 10. Chapter 6.
And these are the commands and constitutions and decrees which your ever-living God commands you to learn to practice in the land to which you will pass over to possess. So you must fear your ever-living God, and preserve all the constitutions and commandments which I command you, you and your children and the children of your children, all the time of your life. Listen, therefore, Israel, and keep and practice them, so that you may prosper, and so that you may increase greatly, as your ever-living God promised to your fathers, upon entering into the land flowing with milk and honey. Listen, Israel. Our ever-living God is a single life. Therefore love your ever-living God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. And let these words that I command you today be in your heart, and teach them to your sons, and speak about them when sitting in your house, and in traveling on your journeys, and when lying down, and when rising up. Bind them also as ornaments upon your hands, and as frontlets between your eyes, and write them upon the doors of your house, and upon your gates. And then, when your ever-living God brings you to the country which he promised to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to you great and beautiful cities that you built not, and houses full of furniture that you did not make, and many fortresses which you did not fortify, vineyards and oliveyards which you did not plant, where you may eat and be satisfied. Take care to yourselves, lest you forget the ever-living who brought you from the land of the Mitzrayim, from the house of bondage. Fear your ever-living God, and serve him, and swear by his name. You must not go after other gods than God, those of the peoples around you, for your ever-living God is a jealous God. Guard yourselves, lest the anger of your ever-living God should burn against you, and he should destroy you from off the face of the land. You shall not try your ever-living God as you tried him in Massah. You shall carefully preserve the commands of your ever-living God, and his proofs, and his constitutions that he ordered you. And you shall practice justice and right in the sight of the ever-living, so that you may prosper and possess that beautiful country where the ever-living promised to your fathers to repulse all your enemies before you, as the ever-living will do. When your son inquires of you hereafter, asking, Why did the ever-living God order these proofs and constitutions and decrees for you? You shall answer to your son, We were slaves to Pharaoh in Mitzrayim, and the ever-living brought us out from among the Mitzrites with a strong hand, and the ever-living produced great wonders and portents, and inflicted sufferings on the Mitzrites, upon Pharaoh and upon all his family in our sight, but brought us from there, and brought us up to give us this country which he had promised to our fathers. Therefore the ever-living commanded us to practice all these constitutions, and to fear our ever-living God for our benefit all the time of our lives, as at this day. And it is right for us that we should continue to practice the whole of these commands before our ever-living God, as he commanded us.
Chapter 7.
For your ever-living God will bring you to the country which you are now going to seize, to plunder nations more numerous than yourselves, the Kithites, and the Gershonites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and stronger than yourselves, whom your ever-living God will deliver up before you, and you will defeat them. Destroy them, and make no treaty with them, and do not pity them. Do not marry with them. Give not your daughter to his son, nor take his daughter for your son. For it will turn your heart from following me, and you will serve other gods, when the anger of the ever-living will burn against you, and he will destroy you quickly. Consequently you shall do this to them. You shall throw down their altars, and break their columns, and smash their shrines, and melt their cast images in the fire, because you are a people devoted to your ever-living God. Your ever-living God chose you to be a people for himself, separated from all the peoples who are upon the face of the earth. Has he not increased you more than all the peoples? The ever-living did not unite with you because you were the most numerous of the peoples, but chose you when you were the least of all the peoples. And the ever-living loved you because of keeping the oath which he swore to your fathers. Therefore the ever-living brought you out with a strong hand, and freed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh king of the Mitzrayim. Therefore know that the ever-living is God, the God who faithfully keeps his covenant and shows favor to those who love him and regard his commands for 1,000 generations, but repays his enemies, those who hate him, to their face by destroying them. He will not delay to repay those who hate him to their face. Therefore preserve the commandments and the constitutions and the decrees which I command you today, and practice them. For there will be a reward if you listen to these decrees, and preserve and practice them. For your ever-living God will keep the covenant and the favor which he promised to your fathers, and will love you and bless you, and increase the fruit of your body and the fruit of your grounds. Your corn, your grapes, and your oil, your cattle shall breed, and your sheep bring forth upon the ground which he promised to your fathers to give to you. You shall be more blessed than any people. Neither male nor female shall be sterile among you, nor your cattle barren. And the ever-living will turn from you every disease and sickness of the Mizrahites, the sufferings that you know. He will not lay them upon you, but will put them on all who hate you. Therefore you shall consume all the peoples whom your ever-living God gives to you. Your eyes shall not have pity on them, nor serve their gods, for they will be your snare. If, however, your heart should say to you, these nations are more numerous than I am not able to dispossess them. Fear them not. Remember what your ever-living God did to Pharaoh and to all the Mizrahites, the great calamities that your eyes saw, and the wonders and the portents and the strong hand and the directing arm with which your ever-living God brought you out. Your ever-living God will do the same to all the peoples before whom you are afraid. Your ever-living God will also send upon them fever to destroy the remnants who hide themselves from you. You shall not be pursued by them, for your ever-living God is among you, a great God of light. Your ever-living God, however, will drive these nations before you little by little. You shall not be able to master them quickly, for fear the beasts of the field should multiply upon you. But your ever-living God will displace them before you, and dissolve with much confusion until they perish. And he will deliver their kings to your hand, and you shall destroy their names from under the skies. Not a man can stand before you until you have desolated them. You shall burn their carved gods with fire. You shall not desire the gold and silver they are made of, or take it for yourselves, for fear you should be ensnared by it. For you must serve the ever-living. He is your God. Therefore you shall not bring their foul practices into your house, but you shall be pure. For what contaminated them will contaminate you, and what defiled them will defile you. Therefore be pure.
Chapter 8.
You must regard all the commands that I order you today in practice, so that you may live and increase and go to seize the country that the ever-living promised to your fathers. But remember how all the way your ever-living God led you these 40 years in the desert, to try you, to prove you, to examine you, whether you would keep his commands from your heart or not. Therefore he afflicted you, and hungered you, and fed you with manna, which you had not known, nor had your fathers known, so that he might teach you that man lives not by bread alone, but that man lives by all that comes from the mouth of the ever-living. Your clothes were not rags, nor your feet shoeless in those 40 years, and you knew in your heart that as a man instructs his son, your ever-living God instructed you. Therefore keep the commands of your ever-living God, and walk in his paths, and fear him. For your ever-living God brings you to this beautiful land, a land of brooks of water, springs and torrents coming out of the valleys and out of the hills, a country of wheat and barley and vines and figs and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a country where you will not eat from stores. Bread shall never fail at all in it. A land where the rocks have iron, and from whose hills you can dig copper, where you can eat and fill yourselves, and bless your ever-living God over the beautiful land he has given to you. Take care of yourselves, lest you should forget the ever-living your God. Only keep his commandments and decrees and institutions which I command you today, for fear when you eat and are full, and have built yourselves beautiful houses and reside in them, and your cattle and your sheep multiply, and your silver and gold have increased, and all your possessions have grown, and your heart rises, that you might forget your ever-living God who brought you up out of the land of the Mizraim, from the house of bondage, who led you through this great desert where you saw the fiery serpents and scorpions, and the dry, waterless land, where he brought you water from the flinty rock, feeding you in the desert with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, so that he might try you with the purpose of ultimately benefiting. You, however, may say to your heart, I have obtained this power by my own courage and the vigor of my hands. Yet remember it was your ever-living God who gave you that courage and granted that power, so that he might establish the covenant which he swore to your fathers, as he does today. But if ever it comes that you forget your ever-living God, and go after other gods and serve and worship them,
I bear witness to you today that you shall perish like the nations the ever-living destroyed from before you. Thus you shall perish, because you did not listen to the voice of your ever-living God. Chapter 9.
Listen, Israel, you are about to cross the Jordan to seize nations greater and more powerful than yourself, great cities fortified up to the skies. A people great and tall, sons of the Anakim whom you know, and of whom you said, "Who can stand before the sons of Anak?" But I bear witness today that your ever-living God, who goes before you as a consuming fire, he will devastate them, and he will defeat them before you, and you shall drive out and destroy them from the hills, as the ever-living commanded you. When your ever-living God has driven them away from you, think not to say to your heart, "For my righteousness the ever-living has brought me to possess this country. Therefore the ever-living has driven out the nations who possessed it before me." Not for your righteousness, nor for the rectitude of your heart did you come to possess their country, but because of the wickedness of those nations your ever-living God drove them out before you, and for the same reason he established the covenant which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Consequently, learn that your ever-living God has not given you to possess that beautiful country because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, forget not how you have provoked your ever-living God in the desert, from the day he brought you out of the land of the Mitzrayim until you arrived at this spot. You have been rebels against the ever-living. In Horeb also you provoked the ever-living, and the ever-living was angry with you to destroy you, when I went up the mountain to receive the 2 tables of stone, the tables of the covenant which the ever-living made with you, when I stayed 40 days and 40 nights, eating no bread and drinking no water, when the ever-living gave to me the 2 tables of stone written by the finger of God, and upon them all the commandments which the ever-living dictated to you on the hill from the midst of the fire at the time of the public assembly. And there at the end of 40 days and 40 nights the ever-living gave to me the 2 tables of stone, the tables of the covenant. When the ever-living said to me, "Arise, go down from this hill, for your people whom I brought out from among the Mitzrayim have gone to corruption. They have turned quickly from what I commanded them. They have cast an idol for themselves." The ever-living also spoke to me, saying, "I have observed this people, and see that it is a perverse people. Fly from me, and I will destroy and sweep their name from under the heavens, and I will make from you a powerful nation, and a greater than they." I consequently turned and descended from the hill, and the hill burnt with fire. But the 2 tables of stone were in my 2 hands. Then I looked and perceived that you had sinned against your ever-living God, having made for yourselves a cast metal calf, turning yourselves soon from the path which the ever-living commanded you. So I raised the 2 tables and threw them from my 2 hands and broke them in your sight. I afterwards fell before the ever-living as at first. For 40 days and 40 nights I ate no bread nor drank water, because of all the sin that you had sinned in doing wrong in the sight of the ever-living to provoke him. For I was afraid in the presence of the anger and indignation which stirred the ever-living against you to destroy you. But my ever-living God heard me again at that time. The ever-living also was very angry with Aaron, and would have destroyed him, but I prayed at the same time for Aaron himself. And your sin, the calf that you had made, I took and melted in fire, and beat it, grinding as small as fine dust, and threw the dust upon the brook that flowed from the hill. At Taberah again, and at Massa, and Kimbroth Hatavah, you were provoking the ever-living. And when the ever-living sent to you at Kadesh Barnea an order, saying, "Go up and seize the country which I have given you," again you rebelled against the order of your ever-living God, and were not true to him, and would not listen to his voice. You were always rebels from the ever-living from the day I knew you. I fell, however, before the ever-living for those 40 days and those 40 nights. I fell down, because the ever-living said he would destroy you. But I prayed to the ever-living and said, "Almighty Lord, do not wreck your people and your inheritance, whom you redeemed by your greatness, whom you brought up from the Mitzrayim with a strong hand. Remember your servants Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Turn not to afflict this people for its wickedness and for its sin, lest the country from which you brought them should say, because the ever-living was not able to bring them to the land which he promised, and because he hated them, he brought them out to kill them in the desert. They are also your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out by your great power and with a directing arm.
Chapter 10.
Then the ever-living said to me, Cut 2 tables of stone like the former ones, and come up to me on the hill. Also make an ark of wood, and I will write upon the tables the commandments that were upon the former tables that you broke, and you can put them in the ark. I consequently made an ark of acacia wood, and cut 2 tables of stone like the first ones, and ascended the hill with the 2 tables in my hands, and he wrote upon the tables the same writing as upon the former ones, the 10 commandments, which your ever-living God proclaimed on the hill from amid the fire on the day of the public assembly. Then the ever-living gave them to me. So I turned and descended from the hill, and placed the 2 tables in the ark that I had made, and they are there as the ever-living instructed me. I then remained on the hill as at the previous time, 40 days and 40 nights, and the ever-living listened to me also again, that he should not desire to wreck you. So the ever-living said to me, Arise, proceed, march before the people, and let them go on and seize the country which I promised to their fathers to give to them. And now, Israel, what your ever-living God asks of you is, that you should fear your ever-living God, and walk in all his ways, and love him, and serve your ever-living God with all your heart and all your life, and to keep the commandments of the ever-living, and all his institutions, which I have commanded you this day for your own benefit. Look, the heavens and the heaven of the heavens, the earth and all it contains, belong to your ever-living God. Yet the ever-living chose to love your fathers, and he selected their race after them from all the peoples, as at this day. Therefore circumcise the flesh of your hearts, and never stiffen your necks. For your ever-living God is a God of gods, and Almighty of almighties, the great God, the powerful and the enlightener, who will not regard appearances, and will not take bribes, who does justice to the orphan and the widow, and loves to give bread and clothes to the stranger. Therefore you should love the stranger, for you were a stranger in the land of the Mitzrayim. Fear your ever-living God, serve him and hold to him, and swear by his name. He led you, and he is your God, who produced for you those great things and the revelations that your eyes saw. Your fathers went down to the Mitzrayim as 70 persons, and now your ever-living God has collected you as a multitude like the stars of the heavens.
The end of chapters 6 through 10 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 11 through 15. Chapter 11.
Therefore, love your ever-living God, and carefully regard him and his institutions and his decrees and his commands for all time, and learn them today. For you are not children who have not known, and have not seen the corrections of your ever-living God, his greatness and his strong hand and his directing arm and his wonders, and the events that he effected in the midst of the Mitzrites, upon Pharaoh king of the Mitzrayim and all his country, and what he did to the army of the Mitzrites, to their horsemen and to their chariots, how the sea of Suph, rushed over their heads when they followed after you, how the ever-living destroyed them on that day. Also what he did for you in the desert until you arrived at this spot, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the son of Reuben, how the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them and their homes and their tents and the whole of their supporters, slaying them in the center of all Israel. For your eyes have seen all the great events that the ever-living has done. Therefore attend to all the commands that I command you today, so that you may be hearty, and go and seize the country that you are advancing to possess, and so that you may lengthen your stay upon the land which the ever-living swore to your fathers to give to them and to their race, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the country you are going to possess is not like the land of the Mitzrayim, whence you have come, where you sowed your seed and watered it on your feet like a vegetable garden. But the country you are advancing to is a land of hills and vales, and of rain from the skies, refreshed with water. A land that your ever-living God visits. The eyes of your ever-living God are continually upon it, from the first of the year until the last of the year. So it will happen, if you attentively listen to my commands that I command you today, and love your ever-living God, and serve him with all your heart and with all your life, that I will give rain upon your land at the season of sprouting and of ripening, and you shall harvest your corn and your wine and your oil. I will also give herbage upon your fields for your cattle, that you may eat and be satisfied. But guard yourselves from seducing your hearts and turning to serve other gods and worshipping them. For then the anger of the ever-living will burn against you, and he will shut the skies, and there will be no rain, and the land will not give its increase, and you will soon perish from upon the beautiful country which the ever-living gave you. Therefore fix these words upon your hearts and upon your souls, and bind them as ornaments upon your hands, and let them be as frontlets between your eyes, and teach them to your children, to talk about in your homes, in your families, and in your journeys on the road, and at your lying down and rising up. Write them also upon the doors of your house and upon your gates, so that you may increase your days and the days of your children upon the ground, which the ever-living promised to your fathers to give to them, as long as the skies endured over the earth. For if you carefully keep all these commands which I command you to practice, and love your ever-living God, and walk in all his ways, and adhere to him, then the ever-living will drive all those nations from before you, and you shall possess nations greater and stronger than yourself. Every place that the sole of your foot treads shall be yours, from the desert to Lebanon, from the river Freight, backwards to the sea shall be your boundaries. None shall stand before you. You shall terrify and chase them. Your ever-living God will give all the country to you which you have traveled through, as he promised. Attend! I will place before you today cursing and blessing. The blessing which you have heard in the commands of your ever-living God, which I command to you this day, and the cursing if you do not listen to the commands of your ever-living God, but turn from the path which I command to you this day, to walk after other gods whom you have not known. So when your ever-living God has brought you to the country that you go to possess, you shall place the blessing upon the hill of Gerizim, and the cursing upon the hill of Ebal. Are they not over the Jordan, following the path of the declining sun? In the land of the Canaanites, who reside in the west opposite Gilgal, at the side of the oakwood of Morah? When you cross the Jordan to go to seize the country which your ever-living God will give to you, you shall seize it and settle in it. But take care to practice the whole of the institutions and the legislation which I have placed before you today.
Chapter 12.
Which are the institutions and the legislation which you shall carefully practice in the land which the ever-living, the God of your fathers, will give to you to possess all the time that you live upon the earth. You must absolutely destroy all the columns which the nations whom you drive out worship, their gods upon the hills and heights and upon the mountains, and which they call upon under every shadowy tree. You shall also throw down their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their shrines in fire, and smash the images of their gods, and destroy their names from the places where they are. You shall not do so to your ever-living God, for at the place which your ever-living God may choose from any of your tribes to place his name there, to fix it, you shall go to it, and bring there your burnt offerings, and sacrifices, and your services, and the presence of your hands, and your vows, and the firstfruits of your herds and flocks. And you shall eat them there before your ever-living God, and cheer yourselves in all the success of your hand, you and your families, when your ever-living God blesses you. You shall not offer, as we do here today, all that is right in your own sight, for you have not yet arrived at the rest, and the inheritance which your ever-living God will give to you. But when you pass over the Jordan and occupy the country that your ever-living God will divide among you, and rest from all your enemies around, and dwell securely, then to the place where your ever-living God shall choose to fix his name, you shall bring all that I have commanded you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your gifts and the presence of your hand, and all your free vows that you vow to the ever-living. You shall enjoy yourselves there before your ever-living God, you and your sons and daughters, and menservants and maidservants, and the Levite who is in your village, for he has not a share or estate among you. You must guard yourselves from offering your burnt offerings in every place you see, except in the place which the ever-living may choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I have commanded you. However, you may, to all the desires of your life, sacrifice and eat flesh according to the blessings which your ever-living God has given you in all your villages. Both the clean and the unclean may eat of them, like as of the gazelle and the stag, except that they shall not eat the blood. That shall be poured upon the ground like water. You shall not eat in your villages from the offering of your corn, and wine, and oil, or of the firstlings of your herd or flock, or of any vow which you vow as free-will offerings, or of presents from your hands. You shall only eat such in the presence of your ever-living God, at the place which your ever-living God chooses to himself. You and your son and your daughter, and your manservant and maidservant, and the Levite who is in your village, shall enjoy yourselves before your ever-living God in all the prosperity of your hand. Take care that you do not forget the Levite all your time upon the earth, for your ever-living God will extend your boundaries as he promised you. Therefore I tell you to eat flesh. Wherever you desire to live, you may eat flesh. In all places you wish to live, you may eat flesh. For the place where your ever-living God may choose to fix his name may be far from you. Therefore you may sacrifice from your herd and from your flock that the ever-living gives you, as I commanded you, and may eat in your villages of all that your life desires. But only as the gazelle and the stag are eaten, thus the clean and the unclean may eat, they may both eat. Only refrain from eating the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the flesh. You shall not eat it. You shall pour it upon the earth like water. You shall not eat it, for it is well to you and to your children after you, that you should do right in the sight of the ever-living. Only what you have consecrated by yourself and your vows you shall take up and bring to the place which the ever-living has chosen. And you shall offer your burnt offerings with the flesh and the blood upon the altar of your ever-living God. For the blood of your sacrifice shall be poured upon the altar of your ever-living God, and you shall eat the flesh. Listen attentively to all these words that I command you, so that you may prosper, and your children after you forever, while you do fair and right in the sight of your ever-living God. When your ever-living God has defeated the nations where you are going, driving them before you, and you possess them and reside in their country, guard yourselves from inquiring about them, from turning to inquire about their gods, and asking, "How did these nations serve their gods?" For I would do the same myself. You shall not do so with your ever-living God. For all the offerings to the ever-living which you take up to offer to your God, as well as those of your sons and your daughters, shall be burnt with fire to your God.
Chapter 13.
You must carefully practice all the things which I have commanded you. You must not add to them, nor shall you take away from them. When a preacher arises among you, or a dreamer of dreams, and gives you a proof or an evidence, and the proof or the evidence which he has declared to you comes, to persuade you to walk after other gods whom you have not known, and to serve them, listen not to the words of that preacher or to that dreamer of dreams, for your ever-living God is trying you to learn if you are lovers of your ever-living God with all your heart and with all soul. You must walk after your ever-living God, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and listen to his voice, and serve him, and adhere to him. Therefore that preacher or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, for advising to turn from your ever-living God, who brought you from the land of the Mitzrayim and freed you from the house of bondage. For he would seduce you from the path your ever-living God commanded you to walk in, so you must burn the evil from your breast. If your brother, the son of your mother, should seduce you, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is like your life, should say privately, "Let us go and serve other gods," whom you have not known, nor your fathers, some of the gods of the peoples who are around you, close to you, or far from you, from one boundary of the earth to the other boundary of the earth. Do not incline to him, or listen to them. Let not your eye feel pity for them, and do not grieve or feel compassion for them, but kill. Your hand shall be the first to bring them to death, and the hand of all the people after you, who shall stone them with stones, for they shall die, because they sought to seduce you from your ever-living God, who brought you from the land of the Mizrahites, from the house of bondage. Then all Israel will hear and fear, and not continue to practice that sin in your midst. If you shall hear that at any city where your ever-living God has granted you to reside, it is said, "There come men, sons of Belial, from our midst, and seduced the residents of our city, saying, 'Let us go and serve other gods whom we know not.' Then you shall inquire and investigate, and if the truth of the report is established about that abomination in the midst of you, you shall strike the residents in that town with the edge of the sword, and devote it with all that are in it, and put the cattle to the edge of the sword, and collect the whole of the furniture to the middle of its marketplace, and consume all its furniture completely to your ever-living God, and it shall be a ruin forever, it shall not be built again. And nothing of the accursed things shall stick to your hands, so that the ever-living may turn away from his burning anger, and grant you mercies, and benefit you, and increase you, as he promised to your fathers, so long as you listen to your ever-living God, and keep all his commandments which I command you today, and do right in the sight of your ever-living God." Chapter 14. You are the children of the Lord. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave your eyebrows for the dead. For you are a people consecrated to your ever-living God, and the ever-living chose you to be a people separated from all the peoples who are upon the face of the earth. You shall eat no filth. These are the beasts that you may eat: the ox, the sheep kind, and the goat kind, the stag and gazelle, and roebuck and chamois, and antelope and springbok, and bison, with all cattle that divide the hoof and chew the cud. Those animals you may eat. But of these who chew the cud you may not eat, although they divide the hoof: the camel, and the kangaroo, and the rabbit, who chew the cud, but do not divide the hoof. They are unclean to you, with the hog, although it divides the hoof, yet it does not chew. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat of its flesh, or touch its dead body. You may eat of these among all that are in the waters. All that have fins and scales you may eat, but of all that have not fins and scales you may not eat. They are unclean to you. You may eat every clean bird, but you may not eat of these: the eagle, and the osprey, the buzzard and kite, with their species, and the whole of the raven species, and the ostrich, and the nighthawk, and the seagull, and the cormorant, with their species, with the pelican, the snake-eater, and the bittern, and the vomiter, and the eagle vulture, and the turkey buzzard, with the stork, and the snorter, with their species, and the hoopoe, and the bat. And all the winged spawners are unclean to you. You may not eat them. You may eat every clean bird, but you may not eat any self-dying carcass. Give them to the foreigner who resides among you to be eaten, or sell to merchants. For you are a people consecrated to your ever-living God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. You shall tithe the whole of the produce of your grain as it comes from the field year by year, and you shall eat of it before your ever-living God in the place that he chooses to fix his name, both of your corn, and wine, and oil, and of the blessings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to reverence your ever-living God at all times. But if the journey is too long for you to be able to carry it, because the place which your ever-living God has chosen to fix his name in is too far from you, then you shall bless your ever-living God, and convert it into money, and take the money in your hand, and go to the place that your ever-living God has chosen for himself, and expend that money in all that your life requires, in oxen, and sheep, and wine, and flesh, and in all that your life demands, and eat them there before your ever-living God, and enjoy yourself with your family. But you shall not forget the Levite who is in your villages, for he has no inheritance and share with you. At the end of the 3rd year you shall bring the whole of the tithe of your produce in that year, and leave your villages. The Levite shall also come, for he has no share or inheritance with you, and the foreigner along with the fatherless, and the widow who are in your villages, and they shall eat and be satisfied, because your ever-living God has blessed you in all the work of your hands which you have done.
Chapter 15.
At the end of 7 years there shall be a releasing, and this is the kind of releasing. Every possessor of mortgaged land which his neighbor has mortgaged shall release it. He shall have no claim against his neighbor or his brother, because it is a release by the ever-living. You may have a claim against foreigners, but you must release from your hand what belongs to your brothers for nothing, for you will not be poor yourself, because blessing, the ever-living will bless you in the country which your ever-living God will give to you to possess. That is, if you listen to the voice of your ever-living God, and continue to practice the whole of his commandments which I command you today. For your ever-living God will bless you as he has promised, and you shall lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. Yet there will be poor among you one brother with another in your villages, in the country which your ever-living God gives you. Harden not your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother, but open your hand to him and lend, according to his necessity, what is needful to him. Guard yourself from saying to your vile heart, the 7th year, the year of release is near. And your eye is cruel to your poor brother, and you will not lend to him, when he will cry against you to the ever-living, and it will be a sin to you. Lend freely to him, and let not your heart grudge against lending, but rely upon this fact that your ever-living God will then bless you in all you do, and in all sent from your hand. For the poor will never be wanting in the breast of the land. Therefore I have commanded you, saying, open your hand freely to your distressed brother, to your poor in the land. When your relative is sold to you, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, he shall serve you 6 years, but in the 7th year you shall set him free from you. But when you set him free from you, you shall not send him away destitute. You shall reward him liberally from your flock, and from your corn, and from your wine vat, which your ever-living God has blessed. You shall give to him, and shall remember that you were slaves among the Mitzrayim, and your ever-living God freed you. Therefore I command this thing today. But if it occurs that he says to you, I will not go from you, for I like you and your house, for I have been satisfied with you, then you shall take an awl, and fix him by his ear to your door, and he shall always be your servant, that is, until your death. That is how you shall do. It shall not be hard in your sight to send him from you into freedom, for you shall only purchase your servant by the year for 6 years. Then your ever-living God will bless you in all your work. Every firstborn which your herd or your flock bears, remember you must dedicate to your ever-living God. You shall not work the firstborn of your cow, nor shear the firstborn of your ewe. You shall eat them year by year before your ever-living God, in the place that the ever-living chooses, you and your family. But if there be a defect or lameness in it, or bareness, or any disease, you shall not sacrifice it to your ever-living God. You must eat it in your villages, the clean and the unclean together, as you do the gazelle and stag. Only you must not eat their blood. Pour it upon the earth like water.
The end of chapters 11 through 15 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 16 through 21. Please note, chapters 20 and 21 are in non-consecutive order. Chapter 16.
Regard the harvest month, and offer the Passover to your ever-living God. For in the harvest month your ever-living God brought you out of the land of the Mitzrayim at night. Therefore sacrifice as the Passover to your ever-living God a lamb, and in the place which your ever-living God has chosen to fix his name there. You shall not eat any ferment upon it for 7 days. You must eat unfermented bread only, for you came out from the Mitzrayim in haste. Therefore you shall remember the day you came out from the land of the Mizrahites, all the days of your life. And nothing fermenting shall be seen in all your boundaries for 7 days. And you shall not leave any of the flesh which you sacrifice at the beginning of the evening of that day until the morning. You will not be permitted to sacrifice the Passover in any of the villages which your ever-living God gives to you, but only at the place which your ever-living God may choose to fix his name there may you sacrifice at the Passover, at the afternoon as the sun declines, at the time you came out from the Mitzrayim. So you shall roast and eat it in the place which your ever-living God has chosen for himself, as you turned on that morning and went to your tents. You shall eat unfermented bread with your God for 6 days, and on the 7th day you shall assemble to your ever-living God. You shall do no business upon it. Count 7 Sabbaths from the beginning of putting the sickle to the corn. Count to the end of 7 Sabbaths. Then you shall make the festival of Sabbaths to your ever-living God, and enjoy yourselves before your ever-living God. You and your sons and your daughters, and man and maidservants, and the Levite who is in your village, and the foreigner, and the fatherless, and the widow who are among you, at the place that your ever-living God has chosen to fix his name in. For you must remember, you were slaves among the Mitzrayim. Therefore preserve and practice these institutions. You must also make yourselves a festival of 7 days after the harvesting of your corn and vintage, and enjoy yourselves in that feast. You, your son and your daughter, and your man and maidservants, and the Levite and the foreigner, and the fatherless and the widow who are in your villages. You must feast for 7 days to your ever-living God in the place that the ever-living may choose, because your ever-living God has blessed you in all your products and in all the work of your hand. Therefore you must be glad. All your men shall see the presence of your ever-living God 3 times in a year, in the place he may choose, at the feast of unfermented bread, and at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of tabernacles, and you shall not see the presence of the ever-living empty-handed. You shall appoint judges and recorders for yourselves in every village which your ever-living God gives to you, to control you and to govern the people with honest government. You shall not distort justice. You shall not regard stations. You shall not take bribes. For bribes blind the eyes of the intelligent and pervert the decrees of justice. You shall follow perfect justice, so that you may live and possess the country that your ever-living God has given to you. You shall not plant shrines or any trees at the side of the altar you make to your ever-living God, nor shall you erect for yourselves columns as standards to your ever-living God.
Chapter 17.
You shall not sacrifice to your ever-living God an ox or a sheep in which there is any defect, anything bad, for that would be an insult to your ever-living God. If there should come out from any of your villages which your ever-living God gives you, a man or a woman who does wrong in the sight of the ever-living by slighting his covenant, and going and serving other gods and worshipping them, or the sun or the moon or any of the hosts of the skies contrary to my command, and it is reported to you, when you hear it, then you should inquire carefully, and if the truth of the thing is confirmed, that such an outrage has been done in Israel, you shall bring out that man or that woman who have done that wicked thing in the village of the man or woman, and stone them to death with stones. They shall be put to death on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Upon the evidence of 1 witness they shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon them to kill them, then the hands of all the people afterwards. You shall thus burn that wickedness from among you. If a case should occur among you difficult to decide, between blood and blood, between right and right, and between stroke and stroke, an affair of a contention in your gates, you shall remove it and take it up to the place which your ever-living God has chosen for himself, and go to the priests, to the Levites, and to the judge who may be in your times, and appeal and report the matter to the chief judge, and act upon the decision which he pronounces. You shall not turn from the order that he communicates to you, to the right or to the left. And the person who acts insolently against the decree of the priest appointed to serve your ever-living God there, and the chief judge, that man shall die. Thus you shall burn that evil out of Israel, and all the people will hear and fear, and no longer be contumacious. When you arrive in the country which your ever-living God has given to you, and possess it and reside in it, and say to yourselves, let us place a king over us like all the nations who are around, you shall only place over you the king whom your ever-living God may choose for himself. You shall place a king over you from your brothers. You are not permitted to appoint a foreigner over yourselves, a man who is not your brother. Further, he shall not collect horses to himself, and he shall not take the people back to the Mitzrayim because of its abundance of horses. For the ever-living has commanded you not to contemplate to return by that way forever. He shall not collect wives about himself, nor turn his heart to silver and gold to accumulate them excessively. When he is set upon the throne for his kingship, there shall be written out for him a duplicate of the law from the book in the custody of the Levitical priests, and he shall keep it with him, and read in it every day of his life, so that he may learn to fear the ever-living his God, to guard the whole of the commandments of the law, and to administer these institutions, so that his heart may not rise above his brothers, and that he may not turn from its commands to the right or to the left, so that he may extend his days in his kingship, he and his sons in the circuit of Israel. Chapter 18. There shall be no share or inheritance to the Levitical priests or any of the tribe of Levi with Israel. The ever-living is their inheritance and feeder. Therefore they shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The ever-living is their inheritance, as I said to you. Therefore there shall be decreed for the priests something from each sacrifice sacrificed by the people, whether ox or sheep. There shall be given to the priest the foreleg, jaws, and breast. You shall give to them the firstfruits of your corn also, the firstfruits of your oil, and the first fleece of your flock. For your ever-living God chose them from all your tribes to stand to serve to the name of the ever-living, they and their children for all time. And when a Levite comes to one of your villages in any part of Israel, although he is a stranger there, and comes from any village where he formerly lived, he may serve to the name of the ever-living his God, like all his brothers who are fixed there in the presence of the ever-living. They shall eat share and share alike, of equal value on account of their ancestry. When you enter the country that your ever-living God has given you, you shall not learn the depravities of those heathens. You shall not take with you your son or daughter to a throwing over a fire, to divinations and enchantments, or for witchcraft, or incantations, or inquiry of spirits, or foretellers, or questioning the dead. For the ever-living loathes all these practices, and to sweep away all these practices your ever-living God has driven them from before you. You must be perfect before your ever-living God. For those heathens whom you will drive out listened to cloud makers and to diviners, but you must not. Consequently, give yourselves to the ever-living your God. Your ever-living God will raise up a prophet like me for you from among your brothers after me. Listen to him. You all requested one from your ever-living God at Horeb on the day of the public meeting, saying, We cannot continue to hear the voice of the ever-living God, nor longer to see this great fire, for fear of death. When the ever-living replied to me, What they have said is good. I will raise for them from amongst their brothers one like you, and will put words into his mouth, and he shall report to them all I command them. And any man who will not listen to the messages which he delivers in my name, I will drive out from my people. But the prophet who shall presume to deliver a message in my name which I have not commanded him to deliver, or who shall speak in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. But perhaps you may say in your heart, How can I distinguish such a message as what the ever-living has not spoken? When the prophet delivered it in the name of the ever-living, although he was not commanded. When the event does not happen, then the ever-living has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it in his presumption. Fear him not.
Chapter 19.
When your ever-living God has destroyed those heathen of whom your ever-living God has given you the country, and has driven them out, and you dwell in their cities and their houses, you shall separate 3 cities to yourselves in the midst of the country that your ever-living God gives you to possess. You shall then make roads for your use to these 3 cities, from the boundaries of the country which your ever-living God has divided amongst you, so that any manslayer can fly to them. However, this is the kind of manslayer who may fly there and live: he who has struck his neighbor unintentionally, when he did not previously hate him. For instance, one who went with his neighbor to a wood to cut timber, and the iron flew from the handle of the axe in cutting the timber. Or the iron flew from the tree and caught his neighbor, and he dies. He may fly to one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of blood pursue after the manslayer whilst his heart is hot, and overtake him, owing to the length of the way, and deprive him of life before he has been condemned to death, for he did not hate before the event. Consequently, I command you to appoint 3 cities to be provided for yourselves. But if your ever-living God extends your boundaries, as he promised to your fathers, and gives to you the whole of the country which he promised to give to your fathers, you shall also attend to all these orders, to do what I have commanded you today, and love your ever-living God, and walk in his ways at all times. Therefore add 3 other cities beside these 3, because you shall not shed innocent blood in the breast of the land that your ever-living God has given you to inherit, for that blood would be upon yourselves. But if it happens that a man hates his neighbor, and waits for him, and arises against him, and strikes at his life so that he dies, and then flies to one of those cities of God, the magistrates of that city shall send and apprehend him there, and deliver him to the hand of the avenger of blood, and he shall be killed. Your eyes shall not pity over him, for you must burn out innocent blood from Israel, that you may prosper. You shall not remove the boundary of your neighbor, which your chiefs placed to your estate, when they divided the country which your ever-living God gave you to possess. A single witness shall not be received against a person for any offense or for any sin. For every offense that may be committed, the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 must establish it. When anyone makes a quarrel with a man to do him an injury, both the persons between whom the dispute is must appear before the presence of the ever-living and before the priests and judges who may be in their times. And the judges shall inquire carefully to ascertain who is the false witness, giving false evidence to injure his brother, and shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, and burn that wrong from their midst, so that when others hear, they may fear and not continue to do similar wrong amongst you. Your eyes shall consequently not pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Chapter 21, verses 1 through 9.
When a corpse is found fallen in a field in the land which your ever-living God gives you to possess, and it is not known how killed, your chiefs and magistrates shall go and measure to the towns that are round about the corpse, to ascertain the town that may be nearest to the corpse. Then the head man of that town shall take a heifer from the herd which has not worked, which has not drawn wheels, and the head man of that town shall cause the heifer to be taken down to a vale with a constantly flowing brook, which has not been cultivated nor reaped, and break the neck of the heifer at the brook. Then the priests of the sons of Levi shall approach, for the Lord your God chose them to officiate, and to bless in the name of the ever-living, and every contention and every dispute shall be decided by them, with all the magistrates of the surrounding towns, to the corpse, and wash their hands over the broken-necked heifer at the brook, and asseverate and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, and our eyes did not see it. Cover it to the people of Israel whom you have chosen, Lord, and lay not innocent blood on the breast of your people of Israel. Then the blood shall be covered for them, and you will burn the innocent blood from amongst you, for you must practice justice in the eyes of the ever-living.
Chapter 20, verses 1 through 14.
When you go to war with your enemies, and see horses and chariots, a people more numerous than yourselves, fear them not, for your ever-living God is with you, who brought you from the land of the Mitzrayim. And when you are preparing for the war, the priest shall come forward and address the people and say to them, Listen, Israel, you are now preparing for war with your enemies. Let not your heart shrink. Fear not, nor be startled, nor terrified at them. For your ever-living God marches with you to fight for you against your enemy and save you. The magistrates also shall address the people, saying, What man is there who has built a new house and not dedicated it? Let him go and return to his house, for fear he should be killed in the war, and another man should dedicate it. And what man has planted a vineyard and has not reaped it? Let him go and return to his home, for fear he should be killed in the war, and another man reap it. And what man is engaged to a woman and has not married her? Let him go and return to his home, for fear he should be killed in the war, and another man marry her. The magistrates shall even add to this address to the people, and ask, What man fears with a timid heart? Let him go and return to his house, and not depress the hearts of his brothers like his own heart. And when the magistrates have ceased speaking to the people, then they should appoint officers to the regiments to command the people. When you approach a city to war against it, you shall propose peace to it, and if they will adopt peace, and open to you, then all the people found in it shall be subject to you, and serve you. But if they will not accept peace with you, but make war against you, then assail them, for your ever-living God has given them into your hands, and destroy all the men by the edge of the sword. The women and children, however, and the cattle, and all that may be in the city, all the booty you may seize for yourselves, for you may use the booty of your enemies which your ever-living God gives to you.
Chapter 21, verses 10 through 14.
When you advance to war with your enemies, and your ever-living God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and see amongst the captives there is a beautiful woman, and you have a desire for her to take her to yourself as a wife, you shall take her into the sanctuary of your house, and uncover her head, and pare her nails, and she shall put off the clothing in which she was captured, and reside in your house, and weep for her father and mother the space of a month, and after that you can go to her and marry her, and she shall be your wife. But if it then happens that you do not like her, you shall free her for life. You shall not sell her for money. You shall not treat her as a slave, because you have degraded her.
Chapter 20, verses 15 through 20.
You must do the same to all the cities afar from you, which are not of cities of these nations here. But in the cities of these peoples that your ever-living God has given to you to divide, you shall not preserve a living breath, but devote them, the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, according to the command of your ever-living God. The reason is, so that you may not learn from them to practice all the depravities which they practice against God, and thus you would sin against your ever-living God. When you besiege a city for a long period, warring with it to capture it, you shall not destroy the fruit trees by assailing them with the axe, for you can feed from them. Therefore you shall not cut them down, for the trees of the field sprang from the ground before you came to the siege. However, the trees that you know are not trees for food, you may destroy and fell, and build towers with them against the city which is warring with you, until you subdue it.
Chapter 21, verses 15 through 23.
When a man has 2 wives, and loves the one and dislikes the other, and they bear children to him, both the loved and the disliked, and the son of the disliked one is the eldest, when it comes to the time for his sons to inherit, he cannot make the son of his darling the eldest in place of the son of the disliked, who is eldest, but he must acknowledge the son of the disliked, who is the eldest, and give to him 2 parts of all he possesses, for he is the firstfruits of his love. He is justly firstborn. When a man has a disobedient and rebellious son who will not listen to the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, but disobeys them and will not listen to them, his father and mother shall take him and conduct him to the magistrates of the town, and to the open court, and say to the magistrates of the city, "This son of ours is disobedient and rebellious. He will not listen to our voice. He is depraved and drunken." Then all the people of his town shall stone him with stones and kill, and that evil will be burnt out from your breast, and Israel will hear and fear. When a person has committed a crime condemnable to death, you shall kill him and hang him upon a tree. You shall not, however, leave him upon the tree, but bury him the same day, for God abhors the hung. Consequently, you shall not defile your country that your ever-living God has given you to possess.
The end of chapters 16 through 21 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 22 through 25. Chapter 22.
You shall not see the ox or sheep of your neighbor straying and hide it from him. You shall drive them back to your neighbor. But if you cannot find your neighbor in your vicinity, or do not know him, then you shall preserve them in your own premises. But if it occurs afterwards that your neighbor inquires for them from you, then return them to him. You shall also do the same with his ass, and the same to his clothing, and the same with everything lost by your neighbor, which he has lost and you have found. You shall not use them secretly. You shall not see the ass or ox of your neighbor that has fallen on the road, and hide yourself from them. Going to the spot, you shall lift them up for him. A woman shall not wear a man's dress, and a man shall not dress like a woman, for your ever-living God abhors all who do thus. When you find a bird's nest before you in the path, or on any tree, or chicks upon the earth, or eggs, and the mother sitting upon her chicks or upon her eggs, you shall not take the mother with her young. You must drive off the mother, but you may take her young for yourself, so that it may be well with you, and you may extend your days. When you build a new house, you shall make a battlement on the circuit of the roof, so that you may not bring blood upon your house if anyone falls from it. You shall not double crop your farm. That would spoil the full development of the seed you sow and the produce of the farm. You shall not plow with an ox and an ass yoked together. You shall not weave silk, wool, and flax together. You may make tassels upon the 4 corners of the cushions that you sit upon. When a man takes a wife, and on going to her hates her, and puts insulting reports upon her, and brings a bad name upon her by saying, I married this woman, and when I approached her I found she was not a maiden. Then the father and mother of the girl shall take and bring the maiden with the proofs of her maidenhood to the magistrates of the village. And the father of the girl shall say to the magistrates, I gave my daughter to this man as a wife, but he hates her, and now he sets up insulting reports, saying, I did not find your daughter a maid, but here is the proof of her chastity. Then they shall spread the garment before the magistrates of the town, and the magistrates of the town shall take that man and punish him, and fine him 100 silvers, and give them to the father of the girl, because he had brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel, but she shall be his wife. He shall not be able to divorce her for his life. But if that report is true, the proofs of the chastity of the girl not being found, then they shall take the girl to the outside of the house of her father and kill her, because she has acted disgracefully in Israel by prostitution in the house of her father. And thus you shall burn that evil from amongst you. When a man is found fornicating with a married woman, they shall die, both of them, the man who committed adultery with a woman, and the woman. Thus you shall burn that evil from Israel. When a young maiden who is engaged to a man meets a man in a town, and he fornicates with her, bring both of them to the gate of the town and stone them with stones and kill the girl, because she did not cry out in the town, and the man because he has degraded the wife of his neighbor. Thus you shall burn that evil from your breast. But if the man meets the betrothed girl in the fields, and the man overpowers her and ravishes her, then the man alone who has ravished her shall die, and you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl has committed no sin for death, for as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this crime. For he met her in the field, and the betrothed girl cried out, but none heard her. When a man meets a young maiden who is not engaged, and takes her and seduces her, when he is discovered, that man who corrupted her shall give to the father of the girl 50 silvers, and she shall be his wife afterwards. Because he degraded, he shall not be able to divorce her all his days. Chapter 23. A man shall not marry the wife of his father, and not lift up the skirts of his father. A eunuch and an emasculated man shall not enter a public meeting of the ever-living. The child of incest shall not enter a public meeting of the ever-living. They shall not enter into a public meeting of the ever-livings for 10 generations. An Ammonite and a Moabite shall not enter a public meeting of the ever-livings. They shall never enter into a public meeting of the ever-livings for 10 generations, because they did not supply you with bread and water upon the march when you came from among the Mitzrayim, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from the center of Aram of the rivers to curse you. But it did not please your ever-living to listen to Balaam, so your ever-living God turned the cursing into a blessing. For the ever-living your God loves you. You shall not seek their peace or benefit all your days forever. You shall not exclude an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not exclude a Mitzrayite, because you were a foreigner in his country. The children that they produce may be naturalized with the ever-living after 3 generations. When you go to war with your enemy, keep yourselves from any vile practice. If there happens to be with you a man unclean from any accident at night, let him go outside the camp, and not come into the middle of the camp, and at the approach of evening let him bathe in water, and at the decline of the sun he may enter the heart of the camp. You shall therefore provide a trench near your camp, where you can make a cesspool. You shall also have a spade with your weapons, so that when you turn yourselves to the cesspool and have evacuated, you can carefully cover up your excrement. For your ever-living God marches in company with your camp to protect it, and to defeat your enemies before you. Therefore your camps must be clean, that he may not see anything unsightly about you, and turn away. You shall not deliver up a slave who has taken refuge with you from his master to his master. Let him reside amongst you in the place he chooses in one of your villages to benefit himself. You shall not drive him out. You shall not make a prostitute of a daughter of Israel. There shall not be a sodomite among the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the hire of a ruffian to the house of your ever-living God for any vow, for your ever-living God loathes both of them. You shall not take interest from your brothers, interest upon money, interest upon food, interest upon anything which can be lent at interest. You may charge interest to foreigners, but from your countrymen you shall not take interest, so that your ever-living God may bless you in every endeavor of your hand in the country which you are going to possess. When you vow a vow to your ever-living God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the ever-living your God will demand it from you, and that would be a sin to you. But if you do not vow, it will be no sin. You must carefully perform the utterance of your lips. Whatever you vow to your ever-living God, you must give whatever you have promised with your mouth. When you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat grapes to satisfy your wish, but you shall not put any into your basket. When you go through your neighbor's cornfields, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not cut from your neighbor's corn with a sickle.
Chapter 24.
When a man takes a wife and marries her, if she does not find favor in his eyes because there are found repulsive qualities in her, let him write her a letter of divorce and put it into her hand and send her from his house, so that she can go from his house and depart and be the wife of another. But if the other man hates her, then let him write her a letter of divorce and put it in her hand and send her from his house. Or if the second man dies who took her to him as a wife, she shall not be allowed to return to the first who divorced her, to be married as his wife after she has sinned, for that would be loathsome in the presence of the ever-living. Therefore you shall not defile the land which your ever-living God gives you to inherit. When a man has recently taken a wife, he shall not go out with the army, and no expedition shall be laid upon him for anything. He shall be freed for his home for 1 year, and enjoy the wife he has married. You shall not take in pledge a millstone or its carriage, for that would be to pledge a life. When a man is discovered stealing a person who is his brother of the sons of Israel, and has caused him to be bound and sold, that thief shall be put to death. Thus you shall burn that crime from amongst you. Regarding contagious diseases, take especial care to do all that I have instructed you. The priests and the Levites must take care to do according to the rules I commanded them. Remember what your ever-living God did to Miriam on the march out of Mizraim. When as a creditor you lend your neighbor anything, you shall not go into his house to advance upon the pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring to you the pledge at the outside. And although the man is poor, you shall not take his bed as the pledge. You shall return to him from his pledge at the decline of the sun both his bed and blanket, that he may bless you, and it will be righteousness to you in the presence of your ever-living God. You shall not oppress the poor and helpless of your brothers in their wages, nor the foreigner who is in your country or your villages. You shall pay them their wages daily when the sun shall set upon them, for they are poor and their life depends on them, so that they may not cry to the ever-living against you, for it would be a sin against you. You shall not kill parents on account of their children, nor children on account of their parents. A man shall only be put to death for his own crimes. You shall not refuse justice to the orphan of a foreigner, nor shall you distort it against the widow of a foreigner. But remember that you were slaves to the Mizrahites, but your ever-living God released you from that. Therefore I command you not to do these things. When you reap your harvest on your farm, and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not return to take it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, so that your ever-living God may bless you in all the work of your hand. When you strip your olives, you shall not pick after yourself. That shall be done by the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather your vineyard, you shall not glean after yourself. That shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. For you must remember you were a slave in the land of the Mizraim. Therefore I command you to do these things.
Chapter 25.
When there is a dispute between men, and they appear before the judge, he shall examine between right, and wrong, and wrong. And when he has decided between the assailant and the assailed, he shall cause him to be punished in his own presence according to the extent of his crime. You may inflict 40 strokes, not more, for fear if you strike him beyond these many lashes, your brother should become degraded in your sight. You shall not muzzle a bullock when thrashing. When brothers reside together, and one of them dies, and does not leave a son, the wife of the dead man shall not be wife to a stranger. Her brother-in-law shall go to her himself, and marry his brother's wife, and the first son that she bears he shall bring up with his dead brother's name, so that his name may not be wiped out from Israel. But if the man refuses to marry his sister-in-law, then his sister-in-law shall go to the court of the judges, and say to them, My brother-in-law, who could raise up a name to his brother in Israel, is not willing to do his duty. The judge of the town shall then summon him, and examine him about it, when he shall appear and say, I am not willing to take her. Then the sister-in-law shall approach to him in the sight of the judges, and pull the shoe from his foot, and spit in his face, and insult him, and say, So let them do to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And he shall be nicknamed in Israel, the slipshod man. When men are fighting together, a man and his neighbor, and the wife of one approaches to help her husband by a stroke of her hand, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals, her hand shall be cut off. Your eye shall not spare her. There shall not be in your bag weight and weight, full weight and short weight. There shall not be in your house measure and measure, full measure and short measure. You shall have a just and right weight. You shall have a just and right measure, so that your time may be extended in the land which your ever-living God gives to you. For the ever-living your God abhors all who do those wicked things. Remember what Amalek did to you on your march as you came from the Mizraim, how he met you in the road and assailed your rear, all the sick who were following you, when you were weary and harassed you. And he did not regard the ambassadors. Therefore, when your ever-living God has given you peace from all your enemies around, in the country that your ever-living God has given you to divide into estates, wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the skies. Do not forget.
The end of chapters 22 through 25 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 26 through 29. Chapter 26.
When you come into the country which your ever-living God has given you to divide and possess and live in, you shall take the first fruit of all the produce of the ground that comes from the land which your ever-living God gives you, and put it in a basket and carry to the place where the ever-living your God chooses to fix his name, and go to the priest who may be in those days, and say to him, I have today brought to the presence of the ever-living your God some of what the land which the ever-living promised to our fathers to give to us has produced. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand, and set it before the altar of your ever-living God. You shall then kneel and say in the presence of your ever-living God, My ancestor was a wandering Aramite, and he went down to the Mizraim as a foreigner with a few persons. But he became there a great, strong, and numerous nation. Then the Mizrahites wronged us and oppressed us, and imposed a cruel slavery upon us. But we cried to the ever-living God of our fathers, and the ever-living heard our voice, and looked upon our affliction, and our sorrow, and our oppression. And the ever-living brought us out from among the Mizraim with a strong hand, and a directing arm, and with great signs and wonders and revelations, and conducted us to this place, and gave us this country, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now, see, I have brought some produce of the ground which the ever-living has given to me, and have placed it before your ever-living God. Then you shall bow down before your ever-living God, and enjoy yourself with all the good things that your ever-living God has given you and your family, yourself and the Levite and the stranger who is amongst you. Then afterwards fully tithe the whole that is tithable of your produce in the 3rd year. You shall tithe yearly and give to the Levite, to the foreigner, to the fatherless, and to the widow, and they shall be fed in your villages and be satisfied. You shall also declare before your ever-living God, I have eaten the consecrated part with my family, and I have also given of it to the Levite, and to the foreigner, and the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commands which you have commanded me. I have not passed over from your commands, and I have not evaded. I have not used any part in self-indulgence. I have not consumed any part in depravity. I have not given any part to the dead. I have listened to the voice of the ever-living God. I have done all that he has commanded me. Look down from your holy dwelling from heaven and bless your people of Israel and the land that you have given to us as you promised to our fathers, the land flowing with milk and honey. This very day your ever-living God commands you to practice these institutions and these decrees, and to preserve and do them with all your heart and with all your soul. The ever-living has told you today he will be your God, and that you must walk in his paths, and preserve his institutions and his commands and his decrees, and to listen to his voice. The ever-living has also told you today to be his separated people as he commanded you, and to preserve all his orders, and to fix yourself high over all the heathen, so as to make yourself glorious and famous and beautiful, and that you should become a people sacred for your ever-living God as he commanded you.
Chapter 27. Then Moses and all the judges of Israel commanded the people, saying, Preserve all the commands which I have ordered you today, and at the time you pass over the Jordan to the country that your ever-living God will give to you, set up great stones and spread them over with plaster, and engrave upon them the whole of the commands of these laws when you pass over and arrive in the country which the ever-living your God has given you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the ever-living God promised to your fathers. And when you have passed over the Jordan, you shall set up those stones, as I command you today, upon the hill of Ebal, and plaster them with plaster. You shall also build an altar there to your ever-living God, an altar of stones. You shall not use iron upon them. You shall build the altar to your ever-living God of whole stones, and shall offer upon it a burnt offering to the ever-living your God. You shall also sacrifice thank offerings and feast there, and enjoy yourselves before the ever-living. Then write upon the stones the whole of the words of this law, engraved deeply. Moses and the Levitical priests also proclaimed to all Israel, saying, Today be silent and listen, Israel. You are to become the people of the ever-living your God. Therefore listen to the voice of your ever-living God, and put in practice the commands and institutions that I command you today. And Moses further commanded the people at that time, saying, These shall stand upon Mount Gerizim to bless the people. Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Joseph and Benjamin. And these shall stand upon Mount Ebal for the cursing. Reuben, Gad, and Asher, and Zebulun, and Dan, and Naphtali. And the Levites shall speak with a loud voice, and say to every man of Israel, Cursed be the man who makes a statue or a casting hateful to the Lord, the product of the hands of a mechanic, and sets it up in secret. Then all the people shall answer and say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever insults his father or his mother. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever removes his neighbor's landmark. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever misdirects a blind man in his road. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever refuses justice to the foreigner, orphan, or widow. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever commits adultery with his father's wives, who raises the covering of his father. Then all the people shall say, He shall be.
Cursed be whoever copulates with any beast. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever fornicates with his sister, the daughter of his father, or the daughter of his mother. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever fornicates with his mother-in-law. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever strikes his neighbor in secret. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever takes a bribe to kill an innocent person. Then all the people shall say, He shall be. Cursed be whoever does not stand by the commands of this law to practice them. Then all the people shall say, He shall be.
Chapter 28.
But if you attentively listen to the voice of your ever-living God, and take care to practice all the commandments that I command you today, then the ever-living your God will give you superiority over every nation on earth, and all these blessings shall come to you and surround you, because you listen to the voice of your ever-living God. You shall be blessed in the city, and blessed in the field. Blessed in the fruit of your body, and blessed in the fruit of your farm, and blessed in the fruit of your cow, and blessed in the cast of your cattle, and breeds of your sheep. Blessed in your basket, and blessed in your cask. Blessed in your going, and blessed in your coming. Jehovah will make your opponents to stumble before you. They shall advance by one path, and fly from you by 7. The ever-living will command blessing to your barns and to every work of your hand, and will bless you in the country that your ever-living God has given you. Jehovah will establish you as a people sacred to himself, as he promised, if you keep the commands of your ever-living God and walk in his paths. Then every people of the earth will see that the name of the ever-living has been fixed upon you, and they will fear you, when the ever-living causes you to abound in benefits, in the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your cattle, and the fruit of your fields, in the land which the ever-living promised to your fathers to give you. The ever-living will open his best treasures from the skies for you to give rain to adorn your land, and to bless every work of your hand. Many nations shall borrow of you, but you shall not borrow. For the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall continually rise higher and not be depressed, whilst you attend to the commands of your ever-living God, which I command you today to preserve and practice. Therefore turn not from any of the things that I have commanded you today, yesterday, and before that, but walk after your ever-living God and serve him. But if you will not listen to the voice of your ever-living God, to continue to practice the whole of his commands and institutions as I instruct you today, then these curses will come upon and surround you. You shall be cursed in the city and cursed in the field, cursed in your basket and cursed in your cask, cursed in the fruit of your body and fruit of your farms, the cast of your cattle and breeds of your sheep. You shall be cursed in your going and cursed in your coming. The ever-living will send you cursing, blundering, and blame in every attempt of your hand, till you waste and rapidly perish before the evils assailing you and become desolate. These things shall pursue until you cease from the land that you go to possess. The Lord will strike you with consumption and fever and wasting and burning, and with sword and blight and jaundice, and pursue until you perish. And the skies over your head shall be brass, and the ground beneath you iron. The Lord will rain powder on your land, and dust from the skies shall fall upon you until you are a desert. The Lord will give you to defeat before your enemies. They shall meet you on a single road, but you shall fly before them by 7 roads, and be in terror of every government on earth. And your carcasses shall be food to all the birds of the sky and to the beasts of the earth, and none will drive them off. And the ever-living will inflict the ulcer of the Mitzrayim upon you, and tumors and scurvy and the incurable itch. And the ever-living will afflict you with madness and blindness and bewilderment of heart. And you shall grope for a window, as a blind man gropes in the darkness, and shall not find your way. And you shall also be wronged and robbed daily, and find no defender. You shall wed a wife, and another man lie with her. You shall build a house, but not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, and not eat of it. They shall kill your ox in your sight, but will not allow you to eat of it. They will steal your ass before your face, and never return it. Your sheep will be given to your enemies, and no one will help you. Your sons and your daughters will be sold to foreign nations. Your eyes shall see it, and long for them every day, and possess them not. A people whom you have not known shall consume the produce of your farms and all your acquisitions, and you shall be plundered and oppressed at every time, and be maddened by the sights your eyes shall see. The ever-living will inflict you with a bad ulcer on your knees and on your legs, which you cannot cure, from the sole of your foot to your crown. The ever-living will make you and the kings you have raised over yourselves go to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve vile gods of wood and stone, and become a word of reproach and abuse among all the peoples where the ever-living drives you. You shall take much seed out to the field, and reap little, for the locust shall destroy. You shall plant a vineyard, but not drink its wine, nor collect its grapes, for the worm shall consume them. Olive groves shall be in all your fields, but you shall not refresh yourselves with oil, for the olives shall drop off. You shall beget sons and daughters, but they shall not be yours, but shall go to slavery. The caterpillar shall seize all your trees and the fruits of your fields. The foreigner who is amongst you shall climb up above you from station to station, but you shall sink lower and lower. He shall lend to you. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. And all these curses shall come upon you, and pursue and hunt you to destruction, because you have not listened to the voice of your ever-living God, to preserve his commands and the institutions which he ordained for you, and which should have been a guide and instruction to you and to your posterity forever. But as you served not your ever-living God with delight and gladness of heart in your abundance of all things, in heat and raging thirst and nakedness and want, and an iron yoke shall be put upon your neck until you perish, the ever-living will arouse against you a nation from afar, flying like an eagle from the end of the earth, a nation whose language you have not heard, a furious nation who will not respect the presence of the old, nor pity the young, and it shall devour the produce of your cattle and the produce of your fields until you are ruined, until you shall possess neither corn, nor wine, nor a calf from your cow, nor lamb from your sheep, until you are brought to ruin. And you shall be oppressed in all your villages, and your walls, towers, and fortifications in which you trusted shall be thrown down in the whole country. And you shall be harassed in every village of the land which your ever-living God gave to you. And you shall eat the fruit of your body, the flesh of your sons and your daughters, whom your ever-living God had given you, in the siege and distress with which your enemies shall distress you. The friend who was very dear and delightful to you shall turn his eyes evil to his brother, and to the wives of his bosom, and to the remainder of his children who are left, to give one from amongst them as food for his children, so that the rest may eat from the corpse with him in the siege and distress with which your enemies distress you in all your cities. The delicate lady who allowed not the sole of her foot to touch the earth from delicacy and refinement shall look with evil eyes upon the husband of her bosom, and her sons and her daughters, and the newborn child that comes on her lap, and her children whom she has borne, that she may eat them in the absolute famine in secret, in the siege and distress with which your enemies shall distress you in your gates. If you do not take care to practice the whole of the things of this law, written in this book, and to reverence the glory of this magnificent revelation of your ever-living God, for the ever-living will make your own punishments, and the punishments of your posterity, astounding by these great inflictions and diseases and sicknesses and prostrations, and will turn upon you all the maladies of the Mizrahites which you feared when present with them, and they shall stick to you, besides numerous diseases and many plagues that are not written in the record of this law. The ever-living will bring them upon you until you are desolate and are a small remnant instead of being like the stars of the heavens for number, because you have not listened to the voice of your ever-living God. And as the ever-living was before delighting over you to benefit you and to increase you, then the ever-living will delight to destroy, to desolate, and to bear you away from the ground which you have come to possess. And the ever-living will scatter you amongst all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. And there you shall serve vile gods, which neither you nor your fathers knew, of wood and stone. And amid those heathens you shall have no quiet or comfort to the soles of your feet, but the ever-living will give you there a trembling heart and languishing eyes and a wretched spirit. And your life shall be in suspense to you in the present, and you shall tremble night and day, and have no certainty for your existence. In the morning you shall say, I wish it were evening, and in the evening you shall exclaim, I wish it were morning, because of the fear of your heart that terrifies you, and from foreseeing what your eyes perceive. The ever-living will also cause you to return to the Mitzrayim by that mournful way which I have told you never to retrace or to look upon. And you will there offer to sell yourselves to your enemies as men and women slaves, and none will buy you. The following are records of the covenant that the ever-living commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the country of Moab, in addition to the covenant that was recorded with them in Horeb. Chapter 29. Moses accordingly assembled all Israel, and said to them, You saw all that the ever-living did in your sight in the land of Mitzrayim to Pharaoh and to all his officers and to all his country, their great defeats which your eyes saw, the wonders and the great manifestations upon them. But the ever-living did not give you a heart to understand, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, until today. Although you wandered 40 years in the desert, you were not deficient in clothing upon yourselves, and your shoes were not stripped from your feet. You did not eat bread or drink wine or beer, so that you might learn that I am your ever-living God. Then you came to this place and met Sihon king of Heshbon, and Og king of Bashan, and you advanced to fight, and slew them, and took their country, and give it to be divided by the Reubenites, and Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Therefore remember the contents of this covenant, and practice them, so that you may reflect upon all you are bound to do. You are today all of you stationed before the ever-living your God, your nobles, your governors, your judges, and your officials, every man of Israel, your children, your wives, and the foreigners who are amongst you, the hewers of wood and drawers of water for you, to assent to the covenant of your ever-living God, and to swear to what the ever-living your God has agreed with you today, so that you may rise up from today to be a people for him, and he may be a God to you, as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Since it is not I alone who made this covenant and this confirmation with you, that is established here with us today before the ever-living our God, and which is confirmed to us here today. For you know that we resided in the land of the Mitzrayim, and that you were slaves amongst the heathen whom you served, and you saw their corruptions and their idols of wood and stone, of silver and gold that they have. Take special care to yourselves, man or woman or family or tribe, who has a heart from turning today from our ever-living God, to go and serve the gods of those heathen, lest there should be a root-bearing poison and anguish amongst you. But should anyone listening to the words of this oath say to himself in his heart, I shall prosper, although I walk in the ideas of my heart, for my cup is full when I am thirsty, the ever-living will not be ready to forgive him, but the Lord's anger and indignation will smoke at that person, and he will heap upon him all that is written in this record, and the ever-living will wipe his name from under the skies. And the Lord will set him apart for evil in every tribe of Israel, for all the curses of the covenant written in the record of this law. and the future generations of your sons who may arise after you, and the strangers who come from distant countries and see the afflictions of the country, and the curses with which the ever-living has cursed it, shall exclaim, Brimstone and salt burn all the country. It is not sown, does not grow, and produces no vegetation, like ruined Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Seboim, whom the ever-living destroyed in his anger and in his wrath. And all the nations shall ask, Why has the ever-living afflicted this land? Why should his great indignation burn so? When they will be answered, Because they rejected the covenant of the ever-living, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of the Mitzrayim. And they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they knew not and who could not benefit them. Therefore the anger of the Lord burnt against the country, and he caused all the affliction written in this record to come upon it. The ever-living will also pluck you up from the ground with violence and with great wrath, and fling you into other countries. The secret reasons are with our ever-living God, but the revelations are with us and our children forever, that we may practice the whole of the decrees of this law.
The end of chapters 26 through 29 of the Book of Deuteronomy. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Book of Deuteronomy, chapters 30 through 34. Chapter 30.
Consequently, when these events come upon you, the blessings and the cursings which I have put before you, and you cause your heart to turn back in every nation where your ever-living God has scattered you, and you return to your ever-living God, and listen to his voice in all that I have commanded you today, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, and return to your ever-living God, your rest and your comfort, then the ever-living your God will come again and collect you from every people where he had scattered you. If you have been drawn to the limits of the sky, your ever-living God will collect you from there. The ever-living your God will take you and bring you to the country your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and will cause you to prosper, and increase more than your fathers. And the ever-living God will mold your hearts, and the hearts of your posterity, to love your ever-living God with all your soul, so that you may live. And the ever-living will put all those afflictions upon your enemies, and on those who hated and persecuted you, when you repent and listen to the voice of the ever-living, and practice all his commands which I command you today. Your ever-living God also will cause you to excel in every work of your hand, in the fruit of your body, in the produce of your cattle, in the beautiful produce of your farms, for the ever-living will come to rejoice over you in delight, as he rejoiced over your fathers, because you listened to the voice of your ever-living God, to preserve his commandments and institutions which are written in this record of the law, when you return to the ever-living your God with all your heart and with all your soul. For these laws which I command you today will never depart or go far from you. They are not in the heavens, that you should say, Who can go up for us to the heavens and bring them to us, that we may listen to and practice them? Nor are they across the sea, that you should say, Who can cross over for us and bring them to us, that we may hear and practice them? For the matter is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart to practice. Look, I put before you today life and prosperity, and sin and death. What I propose to you is life, to love the ever-living your God, to walk in his ways, to preserve his legislation and institutions and decrees, when your ever-living God will increase you and bless you in the land which you are going to possess. But if your heart revolts, and you will not listen, but degrade yourselves and worship vile gods and serve them, I announce to you today that perishing you shall perish. Your time shall not be long on the ground which you are passing the Jordan to go and possess. Bear witness to me now, heavens and earth. I place life and death before you, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose for yourselves the life, that you and your posterity may live. Love your ever-living God, listen to his voice and hold to him, for he will give you life and extend your time to rest upon the land that the ever-living promised to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob to give them.
Chapter 31. Then Moses proceeded to conclude his speeches to all Israel, and said to them,
I am the son of 120 years today. I am no longer able to go out far or to come back, and the ever-living has said to me, You shall not pass over this Jordan. The ever-living your God himself will pass over before you. He will destroy those heathens from before you and drive them out. The Savior himself will pass over before you, as the ever-living has said, and the ever-living will do to them as he did to Sihon and to Og, kings of the Amorites, and to their country which you destroyed. The ever-living will thus deliver them to your face, and you shall do to them exactly as you were commanded. Take courage, be strong, fear not, tremble not before them. For your ever-living God himself marches with you. He will not forsake or desert you.
Moses then called to Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel,
Be strong and bold, for you shall bring this people to the land which the ever-living promised to Abraham to give to them, and you must divide it amongst them, and the ever-living himself will march before you. He will be with you. He will not forsake or abandon you. Fear not, shrink not.
Moses afterwards engraved this law, and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the ever-living, and to all the judges of Israel. Moses also ordered them, saying,
At the end of every 7 years, at the year of release, and at the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel goes to see the presence of your ever-living God in the place which he chooses, you shall read this law to all Israel in their hearing at a public meeting of the people, of the men, the women, the children, and the foreigners who are in your villages, so that they may hear and learn and fear the ever-living your God, and take care to practice all the commands of this law, and that their children who know it not may hear and learn to fear the ever-living your God all the time of their life upon the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess.
The ever-living afterwards said to Moses, Now that your days approach death, summon Joshua and station him in the hall of assembly, and I will instruct him. Moses and Joshua therefore went and stationed themselves in the hall of assembly, and the ever-living appeared in the hall of assembly in a pillar of cloud, and the pillar of cloud stood at the opening of the hall, and the ever-living said to Moses, You are now to sleep with your fathers. When this people will arise and whore after the foreign gods of the country where they are going to reside, and they will revolt from me and break the covenant that I made with them. But my anger will burn against them at that time, and I will turn from them and hide my face from them, and they shall meet many miseries and sufferings to devour them, when they will exclaim, Is there no God near me to bring me out from these miseries? But I will hide my presence carefully at that time, because of all the wickedness which they have done when turning after other gods. Therefore now, write for them this song, and teach the children of Israel to put it into their mouths, so that this song may be a witness for me with the children of Israel. For I will bring them to the land which I promised to their fathers, flowing with milk and honey, which they will eat, and be satiated, and fatten, and revolt to vile gods, and serve them, and despise me, and break my covenant. But when these many miseries and distresses and troubles meet them, then this song will be before them as an evidence. For it will not be forgotten from the mouth of their race, that I knew today the distress which they would then suffer before they arrived in the country which I had promised. Moses consequently wrote the song on that day, and taught it to the children of Israel. Afterwards he instructed Joshua the son of Nun, saying, Be strong and bold, for now the children of Israel are going to the country which I promised to them, and I will be with you. When Moses had finished engraving the commands of this law in a record to its end, he commanded the Levites who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, "Take this book of the law, and place it inside the ark of the covenant of the ever-living your God, and it shall be there as a witness to you that I knew your rebelliousness and your stiff neck, here whilst I lived with you. Today you are murmuring against the ever-living, and will be so after I die. Assemble all your judges, princes, and governors to me, and I will recite in their hearing these words, and I will call as witnesses to them heaven and earth, that I knew that after my death you would corrupt and turn yourselves from the path which I commanded you, and acquire for yourselves misery in the future, for you will do evil in the eyes of the ever-living, and provoke him by the fabrications of your own hands." Then Moses repeated the words of this song in the hearing of all the assembly of Israel to their end. Chapter 32.
Listen, heaven, and I will speak, and hear my utterance, earth. My teaching shall drop like rain, my utterance spread like dew, like showers upon the herbage, and like sprinklings on the grass. For I proclaim Jehovah's name, I exalt our glorious God, whose fort is a perfect refuge, for all his lines are straight. A God of truth and not unjust, righteous and upright he. Corrupt you have not his son's form, you wayward and fickle race. Repay not thus to the Lord, you stupid and unwise clan. Is he not your forming father, who made and constructed you? Remember the times everlasting. Reflect on the ages of years. Ask your father, who will inform you, your elders, and they will relate, how the highest allotted the races when he divided the sons of man, fixing the bounds of the nations with a place for Israel's sons. For the Lord is kind to his people. To Jacob he measured his share, whom he met in a desert country, when he strayed in a howling waste. He turned him, and he directed. He watched as the ball of his eye. He guarded his nest like an eagle. He fluttered over his prey. He spread his wings to support him. He carried him by their strength. He was led by Jehovah alone. He had no strange god with him. He will raise him high in the country. He will eat of the fruits of the field, and oil from the flinty rock. Cow's cheese and butter of sheep, along with best of the lambs, and of Bashan's rams and goats, with the fattest grains of the wheat, drank the foaming blood of the grape. Yet the fat good man will kick. You will be fat, will be stout and bloated, and forsake your Maker your God, and fall from the rock of his safety, and by strangers raise his wrath. By depravities raise disgust, and godless worship demons, gods that you never knew, fresh from abroad imported, whom your fathers never feared, and neglect the power that made you, and forget your God in your lust. But the Lord will see and will sorrow, be sad for his daughters and sons. Say, my face I will veil from them, I will see what it is they pursue. For they are a race that is faithless. They never will build on the truth. They provoke me with fictile gods. They insult with the idols they make. So I vex by an unknown people. By a nation unthought I provoke. Then a fire shall go from my presence, and burn down to the pit below, and consume the land and its produce. And igniting the base of the hills, it shall rush to their top with a roar. I will feed my arrows upon them, mad with famine and fever's rage. As a bitter force of destruction I will send fierce beasts upon them, with the venomous snakes of the dust. Without the sword shall devour, and terrors invade their homes, alike on the youth and the maiden, the suckling child and the gray beard. I declare I would blow them away, I would blot from the memory of man, unless on account of their foemen, lest their oppressors should see, and say, our own hand has conquered. But did not Jehovah do it? For the race was bereft of its senses, and had no understanding left. I would they were wise to reflection, that they understood its results. Then one should chase 1,000, and two could repulse a host, except for the power who sold them, and the Lord who delivered them up. For their rock is not like our rock, our foes being judges themselves. For their vine is a true stock of Sodom, from Gomorrah's blasted farm. Its bunches are bunches of poisons, bitter clusters of grapes it yields. Their wine is the venom of serpents, and the poison of deadly asps. Is it not stored up beside me, and well sealed up in my barns, a means of avenge and requital, when the time of their punishment comes? When their day of distress approaches, its agents are ready prepared. Then the Lord will redress his people, for his servants he deeply grieves, when he sees their power departing, and fail, and fade, and decay. Then he asks, where now are their godlings, the powers upon whom they trust, who ate the fat of their offerings, and drank up the draughts of their wine? Can they now arise and help you? Can they now be your hope? Look, I only myself am that, and there is no God but me. I am the truth and the life. I wound, and I can restore, and none can tear from my hand. So I lift up my hand to the heavens, and declare, as forever I live, I will flash my sword as the lightning, and justice stands on my right. I will put distress upon tyrants, and repayment upon my foes. My darts will be drunk with their blood, and my sword will devour their flesh. Drink the blood of the slain and captives, and the chiefs who lead on my toes. You heathen, rejoice with his people, for he raises the blood of his saints, and upon their oppressors does justice, and the land of his people protects. Moses came forward and recited all the words of this song in the hearing of the people, and of Hoshea the son of Nun. When Moses had finished reciting all these verses to Israel, he said to them, Fix upon your hearts all the ideas which I have commanded to you and to your children, from the first until today, and take care to practice the whole of the purport of this legislation. For I have not merely spoken myself to you, but he who is your life has spoken it, to extend your times upon the land which you pass over the Jordan to possess. The ever-living afterwards spoke to Moses on that very day, saying, Go up the hill by the ford to Mount Nebo, and survey the land of Canaan, which I will give to the children of Israel for possession. And you shall die upon the mountain that you ascend, and be added to your people, as Aaron your brother died on the hill of hills, and was added to his people, because you did not exalt me among the children of Israel at Meribah of Kadesh, in the desert of Sin, where you did not sanctify my presence among the children of Israel. Therefore you shall survey the country near it, but you shall not enter the country which I will give to the sons of Israel. Chapter 33. And having been thus spoken to, Moses, the man of God, blessed the sons of Israel before his death, and said, The Lord came down from Sinai, and on them shone from the tempest. He blazed from Paran's hill, and brought 10,000 saints. His flaming right hand ruled, for love of his sacred tribes. On your hand let them trust, at your word rise and march. Let Moses give them laws, as prince of Jacob's host, and be Yeshurun's leader, controlling the nation's chiefs, uniting Israel's tribes. Let Reuben live, not die, and let his number be great. He then said to Judah, Let the Lord hear Judah's voice, and his hand go out with his men, as a power and help from his foes. And then to Levi he said, You have the sweetness and light. You are with the one with a trust. For at Massah you showed your truth, and fought at the waters of strife. Who said to his father and mother, I have no reverence for you. And as brother he recognized none, and had no regard for his son, when he was the guard of your truth, and stood in defense of your bond. Let them teach Jacob decrees, and in Israel settle your laws, and offer the incense to you, on your altar presenting the gifts. Bless, Lord, their power and work, and break through the strength of their foes, and their enemies when they arise.
He said to Benjamin,
The beloved of the Lord rests secure, relying on him all the day, and borne safe up in his arms.
Then to Joseph he said,
May the Lord give bliss to his land, by the gifts of the skies and the dews, and with fountains bubbling below, and the bounties produced by the sun, and the gifts that increase with the moon, and gifts from the hills of the east, and the wealth of the ancient hills, and the gifts that burst from the ground, and delights of the shadowing palms, come all upon Joseph's head, and crown him his brother's prince. Like a noble and splendid prince, his horns are the horns of a bull. With them he will conquer nations, and unite the land into one. For the 10,000s of Ephraim and Manasseh's thousands are his.
Then he said to Zebulun,
Zebulun, be glad in your ports, and Issachar in your halls. They are called the men of the hills, where they feast in a noble feast. For they suck of the wide-spreading seas, and the treasures that hide in the sand.
Then turning to Gad, he said,
Let the horseman Gad be blessed. Like a tiger he crouches down, and tears with his arms and jaws. But he thought at the first for himself, so was granted a princely home, and produced the leaders of men, who did the work of the Lord, and first led my people right.
Then he exclaimed to Dan,
Dan is the whelp of a lion, who leaps up out of Bashan.
Then he said to Naphtali,
Naphtali loves to take rest, and be filled with the gifts of the Lord. He possesses the tides of the sea.
Then as to Asher said,
Let Asher be blessed with his sons. By his brothers let him be loved, and dabble his footsteps in oil. Your bars shall be iron and bronze, and your wealth like the tide of the seas. There is none like the God of Yeshurun, who rides on the heavens to your aid, and floats on the heights of the clouds. His God is above from of old, and beneath the eternal arms, who sweeps out the foe from your face, and gives the command to destroy. Israel dwells alone and secure, Jacob's spring in a land of the corn, and his skies drop dews of wine. Blessed Israel, who is like you? A victor race for Jehovah, your shield, your help, and your sword. You shall grow and subdue your foes, and advance on their hills like a road.
Chapter 34. Moses then ascended the hill of Nebo, from the fords of Moab, up to the peak of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the ever-living showed him all the country. For the ever-living had said to him, This is the country that I promised to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your race. Look at it with your eyes, for you shall not pass over it. Moses, the servant of the ever-living, consequently died there before Jehovah, in the land of Moab, and was buried in a valley in that country, behind Beth Peor. Moses was 120 years old at his death. His eyes were not weak, and his strength had not gone. The children of Israel, however, wept for Moses at the fords of Moab 30 days, until the time of mourning the loss of Moses was completed. But Joshua the son of Nun was full of spirit and intelligence, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. So the children of Israel listened to him, and he acted as the ever-living had commanded to Moses. The end of chapters 30 through 34, and the end of the Book of Deuteronomy, from the Holy Bible in Modern English, translated by Farrar Fenton. Recording by Mark Penfold.